Hey everyone, welcome to yet another episode of the Inner Realm podcast. Before we start off, some housekeeping points. I apologize if I'm a bit sniffly and I cough and I do all those things with my throat, like scratch my throat and all that. Unfortunately, I've got a cold. I just hope that I won't be too irritable for you, the listener. And if it is too bad, I'll edit the whole thing out and make it a bit more palatable. The second thing is, I've got to admit, I've tried recording this episode 4 times already. Yeah, I've spent 4 different sessions on trying to get this episode right. And I don't know why, but I simply seem to not be happy with it. And I simply seem to not be able to convey the points that I'm trying to convey. I think partially it's because even when I was writing the script for this episode, I was a bit hesitant because, Red Pill, Manosphere, MGTOW, NoFap, whatever these movements or subcultures are, they tend to be rather controversial and very, very political by nature. And as a result of that, of course, I'm not a fan of this kind of casual dismissiveness of, corporate media and anyone that does talk about these communities critically. I think they've been so maligned and miscaricatured that anyone who tries to even be a bit critical of these communities uh, end up getting out of slack or end up being called a fraud or a liar or something like that, simply because I feel like people that are parts of these communities who've benefited a lot, including myself, by the way, have become very defensive of what these communities are. So when I was trying to record the episode, every single time I felt like I said something that I shouldn't have said, I felt like I misspoke or I said something that was untrue. So I just, ethically, I didn't feel like I could publish that episode. So I kept trying again and again. Hey, look, let's hope I get it right this time. In any case, before I start off, because of as I said, the nature of the podcast, I do want to stipulate the whole episode with some caveats. Um, it's not only because of the point I made before, but also because this is probably the first podcast where I'm actually being critical of a certain ideology and a certain cultural movement. I generally don't tend to do that, but this is the first time I'm actually, I think, breaking down my qualms with a certain movement and my disagreements with a certain ideology and fleshing it out on a podcast. Therefore, I will say things that'll contradict my claims, especially my critique of ideology. Ironically, I think I'm gonna critique ideology using ideology. So, ipso facto, at times, I will be an utter hypocrite. Um, I will also say, adding on to that point, I haven't given any of these communities the time and research effort they deserve. So I really do apologize if I'm being casually cynical or dismissive of the ideologies. I mean, it does take a lot of work to truly understand the essence of what these cultural movements and subcultures are. And in no way my intent at least, and that's why I said I recorded this podcast 5 times already, for 4 times already. This is the fifth time because I just didn't want to misrepresent these movements the way the corporate media does. So I hope at least my intent in making this, recording this episode comes across. And I'll definitely put in the intellectual and even experiential labor to try and understand these groups and the individuals within these groups deeply. As a matter of fact, I'm reading Rollo Tomassi's book, The Rational Male. Now, according to his own Amazon page, I think he calls. Let me actually look it up. According to his own Amazon page, he calls himself the godfather of the red pill, and I feel like he's very influential amongst his red pill dating manosphere community, helping men find women and get into relationships and all that. And look, even his book, there's some good advice. I think there are some things that can be applicable to our lives, and I also wanted to sort of understand the broader view of how he views sexual dynamics and relationships between men and women, which is why I said that I'm not gonna just watch a few episodes on YouTube or go through a few Reddit threads. I'm actually gonna try and you know read the books that come out of these communities because I feel like writing is the most thought out, most precise, and well detailed thoughts. If you truly want to know a person, well, first look at what they do, but also read what they write over what they say, because what they write in some sense is more thought out, uh, fleshed out ideas. And it's because of that, I would say, because of all these points I made, that this will definitely be my first episode on this topic of many to come, because these subcultures, I hate it when, corporate media maligns them, saying that there's some French far right group or some silly thing like that, because they actually are quite influential. I personally know a lot of people that have got great benefit from these communities, and that would be including myself, which is why I firstly want to make a case in defense of bro culture. Now, we've got to delineate bro culture from the red pill communities on the internet. I think bro culture is a bit more broader, whereas red pill is a lot more political. Oh, by the way, I just want to add a point. Since obviously MGTOW, Manosphere, NoFap, it's all a mouthful. As a umbrella term, I'll just use the word red pill community. But I do think this whole bro culture and this idea of masculinity, what would you call it, hyper masculinity maybe, it does connect a lot with the red pill community. It goes hand in hand in many ways. I gotta say, as a young man, when I was maybe 17, 18, or probably even a bit younger, and then even into my early 20s, like 19, 20, maybe even 21, bro culture was extremely beneficial for me as a young person. And the best way to define what bro culture is through my anecdotal experience. So, bro culture is greatly connected to sports, and and yeah, like the whole red pill thing. It's interesting, right? Because a lot of people that generally tend to be a part of, really embrace that bro doctrine, the bro culture, probably would consider themselves to be red pilled or whatever. And a good way to define bro culture is actually by a speech by Theodore Roosevelt, the eponymous speech called the Strenuous Life. And I think it captures what bro culture is best in a more refined, gentlemanly manner. And I quote a small part from the speech. It says, I wish to preach not the doctrine of ignoble ease, but the doctrine of the strenuous life, the life of toil and effort, of labor and strife, to preach that highest form of success which comes not to the man who desires mere easy peace, but to the man who does not shrink from danger, from hardship, or from bitter toil. And who out of these wins the splendid ultimate triumph? So, yes, as I said, this is kind of the message of bro culture. It's the whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps message. And as I'm probably repeating myself now, it's deeply associated with sports. It's this embrace of masculinity, the good and the bad, keep in mind. And it gives the message of self reliance, tenacity, discipline. And I feel, especially for young boys and young men, this is a great message. Leaving aside the politics, the whole, picking up women thing, and the whole, all the critiques that I'll come to later on, I still believe essentially these are good messages. They not just for men, but even for women, telling someone to take responsibility for their life. It's something that we don't hear much in contemporary culture. And I would also say, on the topic of strength and sort of self improvement, let's say, a good example is Elliott Hulse. Now, undoubtedly, Elliott Hulse is a full on bro. He's like the quintessential bro, and is also very much in the whole red pill community. He's going through his own phase. He had the whole MAGA thing. Now, I used to watch a lot of Elliott Hulse's videos because I was rather, I would say, enamored by strength. I still am. I admire strength, and I really like strongman. And I used to watch some of his videos to, just to do strongman workouts and all that. Before I stopped, because suddenly I felt like he became this very zealous tradcon, traditional conservative, and he was like all he talks about is like how women should submit to men, and he really kind of embodied that whole traditional conservative. Uh, I don't even know the tradcon ethos into himself, and then frankly, it became as much as I still like him. I still think he gives good advice. Like for example, I'm gonna pick up a small clip from his podcast here to exemplify what I mean. Um, but he just became this like annoying ideologue that constantly preached tradcon values and constantly evangelized his way of living and prescribed his way of living onto the world and I guess onto his viewers in this case. Um, but despite all of that, this is an example of why I think this whole bro culture movement and the, let's say, the, what's the word? Not thought leaders, but the more influential people in this movement do give a good message. So this one's on the whole NoFap movement, and which is also connected to all of this. Um, Look, I think young people, especially young men, have a massive problem with pornography. I've dealt with it. I would call it a behavioral addiction. I think a lot of people are either ashamed to talk about it or they trivialize it. But as far as I'm concerned, I know a lot of my mates who sometimes it's like if that isn't an addiction, I don't know what it is. Like they'll go hours sometimes, indulging themselves in porn, consuming porn. So it definitely is a problem. It's definitely something that has to be spoken of. And for the longest time, the only people that spoke about porn addiction and this problem with internet pornography were the red pill bros or the people in this, no fap movement, which is connected to the bro culture. They were the only people that actually spoke about how this is probably a a dangerous thing, that it's probably affecting young people. In their case, they focus more on men, psychologically, spiritually. But I found this particular video by Elliot to be a rather astute take, because he doesn't just say don't watch porn, don't jerk off, or he doesn't just say don't be a loser that just sits in your jocks in front of a computer all day and jerks off for women on the internet, just jerks off to women on the internet. He actually makes a very, very interesting point, and this is a bit of a longer video, but I think what he's trying to say is a good example of the kind of messages one could hear from the bro culture movement, and then how that could be greatly beneficial for young people, mostly for young people, but for anyone really.
I've heard you, yo, Elliot, I've heard you say that men in their 20s should bust their nut once a week. Why is this? I think I'd like to retain for as much longer than 1 week. Thank you, I'm loving this program. So, first of all, I have my conviction about it that comes from what I've studied, right? Again, I'm not an expert in this, but I've often referred to this great little book called Listen to Your Body, and it's based on traditional Chinese medicine, and I do think that there's some value. I think there's tremendous value to Chinese medicine and natural health, right? Essentially, it's natural health, how to be healthy naturally without, big pharma. And so there are ways to live that improve longevity and vitality and make you feel good, right? And make you the best you. And so, according to traditional Chinese medicine, in this nice little cute little book, he goes on and says that there are clear guidelines in traditional Chinese medicine about ejaculation of sperm. So the premise is that the more you blow your load, the more you're losing your vitality, right? And I think we've all sort of experienced that, right? I know I've had, right? It took me until my 40s. I didn't realize it when I was younger. A lot of you guys recognize it more for whatever reason. But not until my 40s I started recognizing it. Boy, the day after I blow my load, and for like a day or two, I'm a little off. And then I also discovered it takes me about 10 days, personally, at this point, for me to feel that vigor, that fire that I had before blowing my load. And now it makes sense to me now, after reading this pseudoscientific, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with pseudoscience, right? In fact, like the whole vaccine thing is pseudoscience. It's like, it's not exactly science, but they're pointing at something there.
See what I mean? For some reason, unfortunately, because they get sucked into ideology, suddenly everyone who's a part of the Red Pill movement also have to be, I would say, unfairly critical of vaccines and the whole movement or what whole thing that happened during COVID. In any case, back to the video.
So anyway, it says clear guidelines about ejaculation of sperm. In general, not more than twice a month is advised because of loss of vitality. Other considerations include the man's health and his age. The ancient texts give the following advice for a man of 20 years old: once in every 4 days. I'm just going based on that, right? At 30, once every 8 days. At 40, once every 16 days. At 50, once every 20 days. And at 60, once a month. So I come to the conclusion. Now, this validates what was my conclusion, or they kind of work together. I don't know if I had this thought and then read it in the book, or read the book and it helped me have the thought, but I've sort of brought this together in my own mind. Or based on my experience as well. I think this is a pretty solid guideline. It doesn't mean that it's written in stone. But one of the things that I've discovered just through my own experience, but watching you guys and watching videos and noticing this whole NoFap semen retention movement, there are a few things that could be pathological about it. And one of them is that it starts to become a god. It starts to become an obsession, what I mean by that, right? In the same way that masturbation becomes an obsession, right? Because you're engaging in that ritual and you're worshiping porn every day when you do this. There is a sense of pride. I started to notice it when I was fasting, right? I fasted before doing semen retention. I fasted, started fasting back in 2018. I only started doing semen retention this year. And so I'm careful with myself because I saw what happened to me with fasting. I started to get proud. I started to personally identify with my streaks. You catch where I'm going with this? I started to make it a bigger deal than what it was. And the monks, the monastery, the guys in the monasteries, right? I think I remember reading this from Brianna Shav also. He talks about how not to be too austere with yourself for fear of pride. He says that Satan loves it when you're really tough on yourself, because then you start to become, well, I did NoFap for 20 days. Well, I did 30 days. I did 50 days. Oh, right? So then it starts to become a religion. It starts to become an obsession. It starts to become an idol. That's really what it ends up becoming, right? Or I fasted. Wow, this guy fasted for 10 days. Well, he fasted for 20 days. Boy, I only fasted for 5 days. I got to live up to these guys. It starts to become an ego issue. And I wouldn't have been able to warn against this as it relates to semen retention had I not messed up during my first season of fasting. Now I don't take myself too seriously with any of this stuff. In other words, I don't make it an idol. I'm not personally identified with it. I don't get my sense of value and self-worth from it. So that's one warning, right? That's more of a spiritual warning. It's a warning against pride. That's all it is, right? Start to feel like, well, look what I did. And even that, just the whole idea that I'm going to fast is sort of an idol. It's sort of a egotistical way of looking at it, when the saints and the divines and the mystics, right? I love the Orthodox tradition. They even call some of their guys mystics. They recognize that it's a spiritual battle that you're gearing up for. It's not a matter of challenging yourself, right? And when it's a spiritual battle, it's beyond your will. And so I can will myself to get something done, and then I can be proud about it because look at me. Or if it's a spiritual fast, it's a spiritual retention or abstinence, right? It's God is helping me. God has given me grace to do this. This is a humble way of looking at life that saves us from pride, but also saves us from depression. Because if you start to think that it's up to me to get things done and they don't get done, you're going to feel bad about yourself. So either way, if our will wins or loses, we lose. If your will wins, you lose because you become proud. If your will loses, you lose because you take that personally as well. It's like the opposite of pride, but it's on the same spectrum. I don't even know what to call it, right? But like depression, right? Depression is on the same spectrum of pride. I don't know if that's the right word, but feeling sorry and sad about yourself is just as it's a other side of the same coin of feeling proud and good about yourself, because they're both wrapped up in what I can do, what I didn't do, as opposed to resting in the Lord and saying and asking God to give me the grace. I think that perspective is good for us, right? Once again, I don't know. I know that there's spiritual wisdom in the literature and the Bible and stuff like this, right? I know that there are good ideas that were propounded by ascetics and such. And then there are commandments, things to do and not to do. But in my life, I've looked at those things and I recognize them as maybe external. Like, okay, I get that. I see that. I understand that. But it's not until, and maybe we got to all make our own mistakes, it's not until I've seen it in myself and others that I'm like, oh, this is practical advice. It's not just religious weird stuff, right? So, people are like, oh, that's all archaic religious thinking. Well, it's actually very practical, right? So it's very practical to lean on God, lean on the Creator, lean on the Father, lean on nature, whatever you want to call it. Even though nature is a fruit of God, I want to be walking with the Creator. Rather than offering it up or recognizing that I am not 100% sovereign over my life, but the grace and mercy of God precedes me, then you can't get depressed. You can't get depressed because your life is in the hands of the Lord. And if He sees it fit for you to have this failure, then it's up to you to be grateful for it and see the lining in the cloud, the silver lining of the cloud, right? Every bad thing that happens to us is because God is allowing it to happen to us because we're supposed to make something of it. But if you think that you're in charge and something bad happens, you start going, okay, what did I do? How do I fix this? Why oh me? I screwed up. I'm such a bad person. And the same thing on the other side, right? It's the same coin. Oh, look what I did. Proud of me. Look at this. I did it and you didn't. Right? It's the same shit. You gotta stop. And so, as just a warning against that, right? I'm not saying that's going to happen to you, but just as a warning, I advise not to push ourselves that hard. I know that sounds like a contradiction from, pro-masculine Elliott that's telling everybody to do hard stuff, but having austerity, having discipline, being committed to something is very different than being attached to something, making something an idol, and being personally identified with it. Very different things. Try your best in everything that you do, but leave room for God. That's all it is.
I feel like this is like, Elliot being as I said, the quintessential example of what a thought leader in the bro culture movement would be. This is great advice. He speaks about humility. He doesn't speak about mere like pusillanimous weak humility, but he speaks about genuine humility. He speaks about the dangers of pride. And, as our culture has become more and more secular and more materialistic, we don't really talk about those, let's say, higher human virtues anymore. And when I was younger, before, I understand Elliot was kind of evangelizing here. He's become very religious. But even before he became sort of the TradCon bro, he used to talk a lot about these things. In the middle of the strength camp, strongman videos. He would give really good life advice, and I wouldn't even go to his channel for life advice per se as like a teenager, but he'd slip it in somewhere, and then I think to myself, oh, that's a gem right there. That's quite interesting. When for example, he spoke about how depression and pride, or depression and this sense of euphoria and eternal happiness, or whatever you may call it, is the same side of the same is a different side of the same coin. That's a very, very brilliant insight. That shows he's got perspicuity. And which is why I think messages like this, all these workshops and different seminars that they organize in these communities, it provides community, it provides brotherhood and fatherhood. I believe, definitely are living in the midst of a loneliness pandemic. A lot of people, I can speak, through my personal anecdotes, through personal conversations I've had, and stuff I've read, are lonely. Unfortunately, unfortunately, modernity after industrialization, and due to how how capitalism has just completely been so pernicious in our society and made people into cogs in this massive machine, it's alienated us, and that has created a lot of loneliness. That, along with traditional little traditional small scale communities are dying off, and people are becoming more cosmopolitan, and people are moving to cities. These smaller communities that were the epicenters of meaning and community, with them dying off, definitely a lot of people are feeling a lot more alienated. Ironically, even though we think we are hyper connected. And all of these yearnings that young men, let me speak for young men for a moment here, to young men for a moment here, have. The yearning for brotherhood, the yearning for structure, the yearning for a purpose. The bro culture fulfills these yearnings. At least it gave me a structure when I was a lot younger and wasn't really comfortable in my own shoes, let's say. So the reason I wanted to put that part in the podcast is I wanted to be genuine and sincere and show that I'm not being casually dismissive. I use that term a lot these days. Casually dismissive of these movements, and they've actually helped me a lot. They've benefited me a lot, and I've even been a part of these movements when I was younger, which is why probably I have more insight into how to criticize them, because I understood how a certain person in a red pill movement would think. Now, this first point is generally the problem with subcultures, nothing particular or specific to the red pill bros. It is that internet subcultures, they kind of become a bit cultish for sure, but they also inevitably go to the extreme, and they're inherently ideological. Like, they cannot exist without being ideological, because they need a dogma, they need a doctrine to attract people, and then that doctrine, once it's got enough people, it becomes a self-perpetuating belief. It becomes a self-sustaining belief the more people that join these different communities. I also believe, and I can't get into this in this podcast, because it's a whole book. But I also believe that, unlike religion, ideology never tells the full story. Whereas religion, I believe, gives the complete narrative. Most religious stories give the complete narrative. Ideology tells only one part of the story. I think it was Jordan Peterson who really crystallized this in my mind when I heard him talk about this. But I thought that makes a lot of sense. So, of course, I've used the word ideology a lot. I've said that I'm critical of these subcultures. I've also said that I'm critical of the fact that they are ideological, plus I'm critical of the ideology. So many things I'm critical of. But let's try and understand what ideology is. Now, it's a difficult thing to defend. Ideology isn't merely a set of principles or a set of beliefs that refuse to update itself. It's a lot more deeper than that. It affects us, the subject, psychologically, way, way more deeply than I thought until I was exposed to Slavoj Žižek's work. So Slavoj Žižek kind of talks about ideology in his film, The Pervert's Guide to Ideology, and he describes ideology best, I think. Here's a short clip.
Hey, buddy. You gonna pay for that or what? Look, buddy, I don't want no hassle today. Either pay for it or put it back.
According to our common sense, we think that ideology is something blurring, confusing our straight view. Ideology should be glasses which distort our view. And the critique of ideology should be the opposite, like you take off the glasses so that you can finally see the way things really are. This precisely, and here the pessimism of the film, of They Live, is well justified. This precisely is the ultimate illusion. Ideology is not simply imposed on ourselves. Ideology is our spontaneous relationship to our social world, how we perceive its meaning, and so on and so on. We, in a way, enjoy our ideology.
All right.
To step out of ideology, it hurts. It's a painful experience. You must force yourself to do it. This is rendered in a wonderful way with a further scene in the film where John Nada tries to force his best friend, John Armitage, to also put the glasses on.
I don't want to fight you. Come on. I don't want to fight you. Stop it. No!
And it's the weirdest scene in the film. The fight takes 8-9 minutes.
Put on the glasses.
It may appear irrational, because why does this guy reject so violently to put the glasses on? It is as if he is well aware that spontaneously he lives in a lie, that the glasses will make him see the truth, but that this truth can be painful, can shatter many of your illusions. This is a paradox we have to accept.
Put the glasses off! Put them on!
The extreme violence of liberation. You must be forced to be free. If you trust simply your spontaneous sense of well-being or whatever, you will never get free.
Look!
Freedom hurts.
Brilliantly put, you know. I think it was only Žižek who really made me understand how much ideology captivates or even possesses us, and once it does, why it's so difficult for us to let go of it. So in that sense, I actually feel a deep sense of empathy with ideologues because, you know, actually, let me read a few excerpts from this essay by Matt McManus on the philosophy of Žižek. He says, the appeal of ideology is that it enables us to bring psychic stability to a social and natural world that is chaotic and broken in and of itself. That's an important point. The latter point is something it took me a bit of time to understand this, of what Žižek is trying to convey. According to Žižek, the essence of being, it may be even a metaphysical, ontological claim, is chaotic. So what ideology does, it is as Matt specifies here, it gives psychic stability, which is why once we are possessed by an ideology, once we become let's say the red pill ideology or the feminist ideology or some political framework or some socio-political framework that takes hold of us, it fundamentally changes our psychology, it fundamentally affects our psyche, and then we just don't want to let go of it. Because as Žižek says, freedom hurts, because freedom really is the confrontation of this chaotic nature, of this chaotic essence of being. And that's a scary thing. And, you know, going on with the essay, oh, by the way, the essay was on Aero magazine. It's called The Philosophy of Slavoj Žižek. I haven't read all of Žižek's books for sure, but I've read and listened to a lot of his lectures. And I would say this essay was quite apt and quite accurate as to what Žižek tries to convey through his work. Another excerpt is, ideology provides us with a way of projecting psychic stability onto the world. For instance, it enables us to simplify complex socio-political and natural processes into simple partisan narratives. Once again, the Red Pill Bros would say, all of the problems that men have are because of feminist, or because of modernity, or because of, neoliberalism, or blame it on some group, blame it on the other. And that is taking a very complex socio-political change and a natural process of society evolving and breaking it simply into partisan narratives, or breaking it simply into something a lot more tribal. And that's the danger of ideology. And this, again, I'm still, in some sense, even though I'm connecting this to the Red Pill movement, I'm still making a very general point on how anyone is susceptible, any movement is susceptible to ideology, including religion, of course. That's when it becomes fundamentalism. Ideology simplifies the chaotic incompleteness of society and nature and provides us with a firm sense of identity and values. There you go. It's what's interesting is, the latter point there, and provides us with a firm sense of identity and values. So you probably remember I said initially that, in my part where I was talking about in defense of bro culture, how as a young person, these red pill movements gave me structure, gave me a framework to view the world through. And it took me a long time, probably 21, 22, and maybe even 23. It took me about 2 to 3 years to break out of it, because breaking out of it for me, it was a daunting task. It perturbed me. It brought this sense of existential angst. So again, and I really hope I don't sound supercilious or patronizing when I say this. That's definitely not. I'm not trying to say, oh, look at me over here, free from ideology. I've got over the red pill movement. I've got over all these different subcultures on the internet, and I'm my own person, and I'm sort of like above them and pointing fingers at them. I really hope I'm not doing that. What I'm saying is I totally empathize with why we're attracted to these movements and how their doctrines possess us. And when Kierkegaard again was influenced, Žižek was again influenced by Kierkegaard, and when Žižek talks about this, how the essence of the world is kind of broken and chaotic, I think it comes a lot from absurdism. Of course, popularized by Camus, but Camus too was influenced by Kierkegaard. And I believe Kierkegaard said this very famous paragraph of his in his book Either Or. And I think this is like typical Kierkegaard, with the humor and with the absurdity, but it's also a typical sentiment of kind of the existentialists. It goes something like this. Marry and you will regret it. Don't marry, you will also regret it. Marry or don't marry, you will regret it either way. Laugh at the world's foolishness, you will regret it. Weep over it, you will regret that too. Laugh at the world's foolishness or weep over it, you will regret both. Believe a woman, you will regret it. Believe her or not, you will also regret it. Hang yourself, you will regret it. Do not hang yourself, you will regret that too. Hang yourself or don't hang yourself, you'll regret it either way. Whether you hang yourself or do not hang yourself, you will regret both. This, gentlemen, is the essence of all philosophy. There are some things that are just so true that the only way to speak about them is through humor, through farce, and I think that's what Kierkegaard is doing here. And then of course another famous line from Camus' Myth of Sisyphus. He says, "Man stands face to face with a rational. He feels within him his longing for happiness and for reason. The absurd is born out of this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world." This is deeply true. We all look for psychic stability of some kind to cushion ourselves and sometimes even distract ourselves from the absurd. And we have no choice. We need to confront the absurd. So my biggest problem with ideology is, in some sense, ideology makes one a coward. It tells one that no, just be comfortable in your own little bubble, in this little ideological framework, and do not confront the absurd, do not confront the chaotic nature of the world, which takes courage. And I believe it's in that confrontation one's soul matures and one develops his character and builds those higher virtues that we so rarely speak about these days. Now, I come to something maybe a bit more specific to the Red Pill movement. And maybe actually, since I did speak about Rollo Tomassi a bit earlier in his whole Manosphere, and because even though he touches on politics, and especially he's very, very critical of feminism, he also focuses a lot on gender dynamics and sexual dynamics and relationships and dating between men and women. So in his book, The Rational Male, and I think this is like the gist of what I got when I was reading it, but I didn't just want to read it, even though I felt reading his book is important for this particular podcast episode. I also listened to some of his interviews, and a big problem with modern society, and this really angers me, and it really annoys me, is we've completely lost ourselves in abstracting and categorizing ad infinitum. We've truly stopped looking as people, as individuals, and rather started looking at them as abstractions. And this has got nothing to do with left, right. It's just it's a cultural zeitgeist shift. Because we live in such a globalized world, we've begun to bureaucratize everything. Everything is becoming rather Kafkaesque, and the individual, in some sense, is being negated, is being made into non-being, let's say, because we've completely begun categorizing everything. Men are this way, women are this way, black people are this way, white people are this way. I don't want to keep going. Gay people are this way, LGBTQ folks are that way. It never stops. And the more we do this, the more we demean and the more value we give to the individual souls. The uniqueness, the idiosyncrasies of the individual, the nuances of being an individual, we don't pay attention to that anymore. And that again, I do blame a lot for the death of religion. I do think a lot of religions speak a lot about that kind of individual spirituality, individual connection with the transcendent, with the divine, and with this kind of abstract categorizing that rarely happens. Seldom does that happen. So, as I said, we've stopped looking at the souls, we've become to categorize people, and it's honestly become kind of obsessive. You look at psychologists, they'll talk about the big five, and they talk about psychometricians, because fairly, maybe that itself is its own ideology, because it's easy. It's an easy way to make sense of the world when we categorize things and put things in their place and give things order. I only really started to understand this phenomenon when I read Dostoevsky, and especially when I read this part in the Brothers Karamazov, where I believe Father Zosima is speaking to this young woman who says that she cannot. Father Zosima, by the way, is one of the wiser, sort of sage-like characters in Dostoevsky's novel, The Brothers Karamazov. So he's talking to this young woman who says she cannot love people, she cannot love humanity, and then he responds with this beautiful paragraph. He says, "It's just the same story as a doctor once told me," observed the elder. "He was a man getting on in years, and undoubtedly clever. He spoke as frankly as you, though in jest, in bitter jest. 'I love humanity,' he said. But I wonder at myself, the more I love humanity in general, the less I love men in particular. In my dreams,' he said, I have often come to making enthusiastic schemes for the service of humanity, and perhaps I might actually have faced crucifixion if it had been suddenly necessary. And yet, I am incapable of living in the same room with anyone for 2 days together, as I know by experience. As soon as anyone is near me, his personality disturbs my self-complacency and restricts my freedom. In 24 hours, I begin to hate the best of men. One, because he's too long over his dinner. Another, because he has a cold and keeps on blowing his nose. Well, that was probably me. I become hostile to people the moment they come close to me. But it has always happened that the more I detest men individually, the more ardently my love for humanity. Man, you gotta read Dostoevsky, man. Like what a brilliant point, what an astute take on society. Many of these internet subcultures are making the same mistake that Father Zosima talks about. As I said, people like Rollo Tomassi, the more I listen to him and what I hear is, what's funny is he unknowingly does this. He'd even explicitly say, I'm not generalizing, but then he'll go ahead and generalize. I remember he was having this conversation with another woman, and they were kind of going at it. They were in deep disagreement. And even when she shared something about her personal life, he instantly took what she said and tried to abstract it out and put her into some box. I didn't see him truly paying attention to what her as a unique individual was saying, but he had to really get the gist of what she was saying and then put her in a box. You're this kind of woman. And I think that's really unfortunate because, whether he disagreed or agreed with her, it's not the case. It doesn't matter. It's paying attention to what her as an individual was saying, which is, to be fair, what the psychoanalysts discovered, the Freuds, that you gotta truly listen to a person as to what they're saying. Don't try and make assumptions. Don't try and pigeonhole them. Don't try and put them in boxes. Just pay attention. So all of these subcultures, they unknowingly categorize women, men, and relationships to the extreme. And yes, this may be beneficial for some people, but I think what that does is, again, there's this ineffable, it truly is, there's this ineffable human experience. It can't even be spoken of. And I think we really feel it only when we pay attention. When we do this kind of categorizing and generalizing, we lose that. It's a magical, beautiful thing. It's a life-sustaining thing. And I feel like a lot of us in modernity have lost that. And to be fair, this is no different to what a radical feminist or someone in Antifa or some other ideologue would do. This again is a problem with ideology, and which is why I think even though one can take certain lessons from the Red Pill community, like the lesson that Elliott gave about, porn and NoFap and all of that, one should never completely let the ideology control one and become a mouthpiece for the ideology, and not to never be afraid to think freely and think independently. It is the most important thing. It's having the courage to confront the chaos of the world and to truly be an independent thinker. One should never forget that. I would also say maybe this is a bit of an ancillary point, but I think it's connected. As the book itself says, it's the rational male. All his books are called the rational male. So Rollo Tomassi deeply respects reason. And generally people who tend to be the rationalist types, the Steven Pinkers, people who, hold reason to be the highest virtue, let's say, they tend to play a lot in this abstract game, in this game of abstractions and conceptualizations. So for Rollo, in some sense, one can never win a debate with Rollo because he would say the moment, let's say we make an experiential claim, not an axiomatic truth, maybe make an experiential claim from our own subjective life, not some kind of statistic or objective claim that just generally applies to everyone, but rather a subjective claim. He'll say, you're being irrational, therefore you lose the debate. So he's already set the axioms, or he's already set the rules for a conversation even before we get into a conversation. So there's no way, which is why, Rollo Tomassi is kind of like the Ben Shapiro's or some of those guys. You rarely see them lose a debate because the framework they view through is that of reason. And again, I'm not being critical of reason. Reason's important. In some sense, I'm using reason in this podcast to flesh out my points and, lay out my criticisms. But reason isn't the only form of epistemology, let's say. It's not the only way at truth. There are many ways. As I said, for me, in some sense, I probably value experiential truth more than even reason-based truth. Because for me, in some sense, one's experience is more palpable, it's more real. It's what one truly feels. And I would say, to end off this segment, the truth is, we're all deeply lonely. No one will truly ever understand us. We must accept this verity that we are all deeply lonely. No one, not even one's wife, one's partner, would truly know what happens in one's mind, what experiences we have. So this loneliness itself is a, existential part of life. I think Paul Tillich talks about, in his phenomenology, he talks about this concept of anxiety. And he talks about meaninglessness a lot. But meaninglessness is one thing, but even I think Paul Tillich also touches on the idea of us just being lonely, us just being like an atom detached from being, this incongruence we feel between ourselves and the world. And we must confront this. There's no other way. There's no other way. Ideology isn't going to rescue us. I'll put it that way. And now, this maybe is, on the whole dating thing, I couldn't believe some of the messages, either explicitly or tacitly, that these communities give out. I'm gonna be honest, it rather disgusted me. Some of the ways that they generalize women, and they say that women are like this, women want this kind of men. And I rarely hear these groups talk about love. Where is love in dating? I don't think I even hear the word love come out, because essentially for me, that's what dating is about. I date for love, for monogamy, for marriage, for deep commitment. And all these communities, people, let's say from the Manosphere or the red pill dating communities, make the whole relationship thing like a game. That it's a zero-sum game where you got to one-up each other and you got to win. They'll use terms like sexual marketplace or sexual market value, detrimental terms. They use terms like economically attractive, and they'll completely commoditize individuals, or women in this case. And that definitely is because of how pernicious I think capitalism has become. And in some sense, this is what Žižek, who's very, very critical of capitalism, says. It's not that ideology, that the ideology of capitalism as just this detached system that just exists on its own. It deeply affects us, the subjects who are involved in it. And as a result of that, which is why even something like dating, which I believe should be undergirded by love, becomes a marketplace, becomes an economical transaction. And the more I listen to, even when I was reading the book, they talk about concepts like hypergamy. And I understand that hypergamy definitely has a lot of evidence for it. But still, they'll state some facts. So we run into the, it's old problem. They'll state some facts. This is how things are. And the ought would be, the ought would be this sort of cajoled or this contrived idea of the ideological presuppositions. And, honestly, some of them make women look like these self-serving, rapacious capitalists who only date men for pretty much for social status or money. I would say, I really recommend this video by Olivia. I'm not going to play the whole thing because it's 20 minutes. It's called Our Conception of Love is Messed Up. It's such a beautiful video. I truly resonate with what Olivia says here. She's a great YouTuber. I'll leave a link to it down in the description. I'd probably play a
And also bell hooks. Rest in peace, Queen. Say we need to shift our perspective and
anyway, I'm not gonna play the whole thing because it's 25 minutes. And she talks about how a modern conception of love is all about how can I better myself, how can I look better, how can I look more healthy, so that I can be more attractive to my partner. And she says instead, why not treat love like an art? Why not treat dating of how can I give myself to the other person? How can I fulfill the other person's needs? And instead of saying, how can I better myself? How can I play this game? And then if the other person has a bad day, if the other person doesn't reciprocate, then this person's not for me. I don't love this person. Like, love is, in that sense, love is metaphysical. Love isn't a mere transactional thing. And Olivia makes a good point that love has to be detached from capitalist ideology. For me, I was talking a bit about absurdism before. For me, essentially, the antidote to absurdism and this sense of meaninglessness is love. It's not just love in relationships and dating, of course. It's not just romantic love, but it's, love within family. What's it called? Is it filial love? I forget. Love within friends, and even if possible, love for humanity as a whole. And when we view this whole thing as some zero-sum game, it truly corrupts it. It taints it. And I would say this, and I really want to make this point. Love is terrifying. It's beautiful and terrifying. I've fallen in love twice in my life. The first time it was beautiful and terrifying. The second time it's beautiful and terrifying. And in some sense, it wasn't up to my own volition. I had no choice in falling in love, which is probably why they call it the fall. And, the whole red pill communities and the people like Rollo Tomassi make it look like tick some boxes and completely plan it out, and then you'll find the perfect woman, the ideal woman that you want to spend the rest of your life with. But that's not true. Life doesn't work like that. Yeah, you could write a book, you could make some very smart, rationalistic arguments and contrive them, using language. But in real life, and this is kind of why I spoke earlier about paying attention to one's subjective experience, one's deep personal being. Love is a risk, and I truly believe that there truly isn't any substance to one's soul without risk and faith, which is why love takes courage for sure, but it also takes a leap of faith. It's not a mere game, or it's not like a job interview where you tick some boxes and you work through some framework. It's metaphysical, it's spiritual, it's beyond that. And it's through that, I think, one truly becomes a complete person. It's through that risk, through that Kierkegaardian leap of faith. And keep in mind, Kierkegaard never said when you take the leap, the landing is soft. The landing can be terrible. Nevertheless, one has to take the leap. And which is why it is not I'm not making a rational case here. Everything I'm saying may sound like nonsense, but I guess I would say, don't even listen to what I'm saying. Pay attention to what your heart's saying. Pay attention to where your heart's leading you. And that takes practice. It's not easy to be attentive to oneself. I would also say another thing about hypergamy and women's liberation. So, firstly, I want to play this clip by Žižek. He talks about marriage. I think it's a beautiful clip from a recent interview he did. And, Žižek also influenced me to get this view of love. So, one thing the Red Pill community, all the Red Pill bros say is that because, women are liberated now, women don't have to rely on men. Let's say, for financial needs, women can earn as much as men want to earn. They can have their own careers. They can have their own life. And therefore, this whole concept of hypergamy, it's probably not. It's probably, well, hypergamy still exists, but it's not how it probably traditionally existed, where women relied on men as being the providers, as being the breadwinners of a family, but rather men and women both have independence to fend for themselves. And what Žižek says, which is fantastic, is that women's liberation has actually given way for genuine love. And maybe this is a good thing about capitalism, because the free market has given that kind of freedom, that the liberation of the genders has given way for true genuine love, where a man and woman can be in a relationship, can get married if they truly love each other, and for nothing else, not for any financial benefit, or not for any kind of, as I said, game in the sexual marketplace, or some game of hypergamy. It could truly be something metaphysical in that sense. And I want to make this play this clip by Žižek where he talks about marriage, which by the way for me is the deepest manifestation of love. It's the most, maybe the highest thing one could do symbolically to declare one's love. And here's what Žižek says.
I think that precisely because it no longer has this economic function. Marriage today can be something beautiful. It's just a pure commitment. You say basically to society, I care for this person more than for anybody else. I want to be, it's just, for me, it can survive marriage as a commitment to share a world with somebody. For me, okay, sex is beautiful, passionate nights, whatever. But as we all know, then when you awaken, there is a problem. And here, true love begins for me. When you, it's not just we were all the night doing it, but when you have to build patiently small daily rituals, daily life. Who will clean the toilet? Who will do this? Who will do that? All these wonderful small rituals. How do you prepare breakfast? We go there. And that's, for me, the true miracle of marriage. This commitment of two, that's why I also, maybe this will be disappointment to your readers, I don't believe in this fashionable notion of polyamory, Oh, I can love more persons.
In the open relationship.
I'm not a moralist. I don't care if people do it. For me, there is still something absolutely exclusive about loving just one person. Because, how to put it, when you have polyamory, open relationships, it's usually too pragmatic. It's I have different needs. Let's say for intelligent talks or whatever, I need you. For intense sex, I need you. For fun, I need you. That's not love for me. Love is not about satisfying your needs. Love is a kind of a more metaphysical even, absolute trust. Love is I cannot live without you, and I'm ready to change radically just to be with you. In this sense, I would say, I don't know what will happen, just let's not get rid of marriage, because precisely today, in our crazy world of all this, the ideology today is experiment with yourself. This is typical American ideology. Don't get fixed on something. Different partners, different sexual orientations. Today you are heterosexual, make some homosexual experiments, make some group orgy experiments, and so on and so on. I don't find this satisfying.
Man, I can't even put into words how deeply I resonate with what Žižek's saying. I've never been on dating apps, and again, I'm not critical of dating apps. I know a lot of people who found great partners through dating apps, but the reason I never was on dating apps was because, well, I was in a long-term relationship for about 3.5 years, so I don't really need one. But other than that, even after I broke up with my ex-partner, I thought about it for a while, and then before I met my, current partner, during that period, the interim period, let's say, I realized I don't want to play that game where, as Žižek was saying, the game of experimentation, I'll try this woman, I'll try this woman, I'll try this woman. It felt like, again, I was reducing women to just a mere commodity and just a mere bunch of boxes or categories that I'm ticking off. And for me, that's not what love is. For me, love is a risk. It's a fall, and love is painful. But one must experience all of life, as that poem by Rilke goes. Actually, let me pull it up. That poem. I've got the poem. Actually, I think I've got it on my. I've got it saved up. Let's see. Oh, I don't want to show any of my. Let me just switch the camera because this is my personal notion. It's this poem called "Go to the Limits of Your Belonging" by Rainer Maria Rilke, and there's one verse in the poem that goes, "Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final. Don't let yourself lose me." I love that idea of let everything happen to you, and I think it's in love everything happens to a person. The good, the bad, the ugly. So, in any case, my point being, all of these subcultures, as I've said many times now, probably ad nauseum, have their utility. They really do. But the way to truly utilize these subcultures, the Red Pill movement, the Manosphere, even books like this, like by Rollo Tomassi on dating and meeting women, which again, great advice, is by having a sort of paradigm shift, and it's essentially a philosophical paradigm shift of how we as individuals look at other individuals and other women. I'm just being specific to the whole dating thing, and how we look at other people as souls, and how we experience love. And I would even say this, you see, this whole podcast, I'm essentially giving a irrational message, because I'm telling to let people make mistakes. I'm telling, let people even experience misery by the mistakes they make without prescribing an ideology onto them. That's what I truly believe. I think that's what truly develops the human soul and truly gives person the vast array of the human experience. Because if not, we are perpetually going to be stuck. Not if not, we actually are always perpetually stuck in a is-ought problem. Yes, we have a bunch of facts, but we derive the ought from it. That's the important part. How do we derive the ought from the is? And ideology will say, easy, just view the ought or derive the ought through this framework, and it's done. It requires no risk, it requires no thinking, it requires no experience. But I think that leaves a person empty, and it makes one's life rather insipid, to be frank. Thanks for listening.